So, good afternoon. We're going to go through the marriage proposal of, not necessarily the marriage proposal, but I want to talk a little bit about the marriage of Yitzhak and Rivka. We spoke on a previous discussion. On Monday, we talked about the death of Sarah, a little bit of a, uh, you know, depressing, even though it's not depressing because the death of the righteous is inspiring. We learned how they live their life. But now I want to talk about the marriage of Rivka and Yitzhak, such a beautiful moment in our people's history. And so it's the source of mincha, the mincha prayer, the source of many of the laws of marriage, of the practices at the chuppah. So we learn from this scene. So I want to just go through it with the Talmudic texts and also with the commentary of Rashi and also with the commentary of Baal HaTurim and with the Hasidic commentaries. And then we'll see where we are. So we're going to start in chapter 24, verse 52. So it says there that actually, let's go back to verse 50. So it says in verse 50 that when Lavan and Bethuel heard the request, they said, Vayan Lavanu Bethuel Vayomer me Hashem yatzah davar. They said, all this is from God. All this is from God. We're not able to speak anything against it, bad or good. And so we see from here, says the Gemara in Moed Katan, we see from here, says Rav, in the name of Rabbi Ruvain ben Estrubli, he says that Minator Minavim Minaksuvim Anu Lomdin Shemei Hashem Ishala Ish. We see from this verse a powerful idea that, and we see from the Torah, from the prophets, and from the writings, that the idea of a marriage to a man and a woman, that God has arranged these marriages from a man and to a woman. And the source for this idea is because it says, Me Hashem yatzah davar. And so it says that in this context, it says the whole matter came forth from God. And so we see from here that that when a husband or when a man meets a woman and they decide to get married, that this is something that was ordained by God, that God had arranged this matter. And also we see from here a powerful idea that these people are participating, not just participating in a love story, they're participating in the concept of a divine plan. The marriage is actually a divine plan. And so therefore, this is an important concept here. And that's why the story of Isaac and Rebecca, which is the first love story that's told in the Torah, the first story of a marriage, is from Hashem. It is not something. It's not something that's just like a rom-com or a romantic comedy. This is something that we believe that is ordained from Hashem. The Torah Tamima writes that it's teaching us. Look how hard it is to find your zivug. Look how hard it is to find your partner. That it has Shakadosh Baruch Hu miyachet shmo al zivug. That we see from this Gemara that God Himself is placing His name on the pair, and they cite this verse in Ksuvim. It says they've cited a verse from Proverbs, and so we see from here that God Himself is involved in the zivug. And the Gemara and also Chagiga says, what is God doing? God is spending His time making shidduchim. We see from here the power of two people coming together and living their life in service of God, that we give this the highest spiritual value. Unfortunately, in the world today, how should I say this? There are certainly many people who are struggling to find, but the idea of marriage as a spiritual goal and something that people should do as young in life as is possible, that they shouldn't wait, like till later in life, but they should do it at a younger age. I'm not saying do it at 18, but I'm saying doing it at a time where you're able to start your life together with your life partner. This is a spiritual value of our faith. That's hinted to by this Talmudic text. Hold on, let me just pause. So they called to Rebecca and they said, "Do you want to go with this man?" And she said, "Elech, I will go." And before that, it says in verse 57, they decided to ask her. Let's call her and ask her. And we see from here, says Rashi, that a woman can only be married with her consent. This is actually controversial, obviously, because according to an earlier Rashi, he says that Rebecca was a minor at this point. So technically speaking, by Jewish law, a minor is able to be married even without her consent. Now, she's allowed to be married off by her father. Now, this is obviously something that's abhorrent in our modern world, and if anybody does that today, they're like horrific. I mean, it's like what they're doing in Afghanistan with the Taliban. But in those days, it was not considered that. And the reason is because those days, the life was so precarious. Tosfos talks about this in one of his commentaries. The life was so precarious that there was always the concern that the father was going to die and before he was able to provide for his daughter. And then the daughter could be sold off into slavery or all sorts of other things. And so therefore, the daughter would be basically betrothed. It doesn't mean that the marriage was consummated as a child, but basically she was pledged to this man. But that if she was a minor being betrothed, then her consent was not required by biblical law. The father is able to marry her off there without her consent. And so Rashi says here, not like that. Rashi here seems to be going against the actual halacha, because the halacha is that a girl is allowed to be married off even without her consent. Even without her consent, she's allowed to be married off if she's a minor. But Rashi doesn't quote that. Of course, obviously, Rashi knows the halacha better than any of us will ever know it. So, Rashi quotes this Gemara, and I think what Rashi is talking about is about the spirit of the law. That even though technically speaking, a person would have been by biblical law allowed to marry off their daughter even without her consent, but Rashi's saying you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't do it. So that's that Rashi, and then it says in verse 59, "Vayishalchu es Rivka achosam ve'esmeni kasa ve'esmeni ta ve'eseved Avram ve'sanashav," and they sent forth Rivka their sister and her nursemaid and the servant Avram and his men. They sent them off. And when they sent her off, Vayivarchu es Rivka, they blessed Rebecca. Vayomru la, and they said to her, Achotenu, our sister, At hayi alfei revava, you should have thousands, myriads of descendants. V'yirash zarecha char sonav, and your heirs should inherit the gates of his enemy. So there is a strong custom to recite this blessing to a bride when she is getting ready to go under the chuppah. It's my custom whenever I am a Sadar Kedushin, whenever I am honored with officiating at the chuppah, that I recite this verse to the bride. I say, Achotenu ati hayilu alfei revava. May you have thousands and myriads of descendants, and may your descendants inherit the gates of their enemies. What's the idea? What blessing did they give to her? So here, it could be the simple explanation is that this was the blessing that they gave to her. That this was the blessing. That you should have these myriads of descendants. But the Torah Tamima cites a different source for it. That what was the blessing? That was a blessing that we actually don't say anymore. That this is the blessing called the Birchas Chasanim, the blessing of the Chasanim. What's he referring to? He cites Mesechas Kala, which is one of the what's so-called minor tractates, chapter 1. It says, Minayla Birchas Chasanim Min Torah. How do we know that the blessing of Chasanim? What is that blessing? What is that blessing? It's not 100% clear. It could be a reference to the Sheva Brachos. It could be a reference to the blessings of the Erusin, the blessings that we say under the chuppah. But those can't be the blessings because those are not biblical blessings. So it's not clear 100% what blessing this is, Berachas Chasanim. There used to be a blessing which fell out of practice that the husband would recite to the bride, but that also doesn't seem to be, because who's reciting this blessing? This is the blessing that Rebecca's own family said to her, which is not a blessing of chuppah. It's not a blessing of irisin or nisun. It's a blessing that the family was giving. So therefore, the bride and the groom are also not together here. There's no groom here. So how do we know? So anyway, that's something to point out. So then it says that Rivka got up. Batakam Rivka Rebecca got up with her servants, or with her maids. Vaterkavna Gmalim Telachna Achrei Ish, and she went after the man. Vayikach Eved at Rivka Vayilach, and the servant of Abraham takes Rebecca and he goes. So go to the next verse, and there's something here that I wanted to share with you, which is very moving to me. It says, "V'yitzlach ba mibo be'er l'chayroi." Isaac was coming from be'er l'chayroi, who yoshev be'eretz haNegev, and he was dwelling in the land of the Negev. Where was Isaac? Isaac was in this place called be'er l'chayroi. Why was Isaac there? Why was Isaac in this place called Be'er L'Chayroi? So Rashi here is very powerful. Rashi says he had gone to bring Hagar for his father Avram to be his wife, basically to be Avram's wife. Hagar had been sent away by Abraham. He had been sent away by Abraham at the in Parashas Vayera. Had been sent away, and now Isaac went while Abraham was searching for a wife for Isaac. Isaac went on his own to go back and bring Hagar together with Abraham. What do you think this Rashi is telling? Let me just pause here for a second. This Rashi, I found this to be incredibly rich. What do you think the message of this Rashi is? Why is he doing that? Why is he doing that? So anyone? Okay, so let me give you a couple of explanations. Okay, I see Morris, and then I'll share with you a couple of explanations. So I saw the answer that I saw to this question relates to the fact that when Avram went to get a wife, or he sent his servant to get a wife for Isaac, Isaac was concerned that his own wife was going to have to spend her time tending to Abraham. And she was going to have to spend her time tending to Abram because Abram didn't have a wife. His wife was Sarah, and she had passed away. And, the woman was responsible for maintaining the household and for, doing certain domestic responsibilities. So Isaac was concerned that his new wife was going to have such a tremendous burden, all these domestic responsibilities, and he didn't want that. He didn't want her to serve as both a wife to him and also a caregiver to his father Abraham. And so therefore, for this reason, he went to bring back Hagar, so he wouldn't need Rebecca. The other explanation is that Isaac was just an expression of love for his father, that his father, he knew, wouldn't have gone to look for a second wife because he was so devastated about the loss of Sarah. So Isaac took it upon himself to help his father move forward at this stage in his lifetime. That he had another almost 40 years of his lifetime, and Isaac didn't want his father to be living in this depression. So now we come to the next pasuk, which is one of the most powerful in the portion and incredibly powerful. So what happens here? It says in the verse, hold on, just record this. So it says, Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach besadeh lefnos arev, and Isaac goes out lasuach basadeh to have a conversation. What does lasuach mean? Where lasuach is a very interesting word. It's not clear what it means here entirely. We'll see how Rashi translates it. Isaac goes out lasuach basadeh lifnot arev, towards the evening. Vayisa inav, he lifts up his eyes. Vayar v'hinei gemalim ba'im, and behold, he lifts up his eyes, and behold, the camels are coming. And then Rivka lifts up her eyes, and she sees Isaac, and she falls off the camel. But anyway, we go back to the text here. And it says, what are the words lasuach basadeh? What's Isaac going out lasuach basadeh? And why is he going it out towards the evening? Normally, when you go out into your field, you go out to work the field. The farmers go out first thing in the morning. And what's Isaac doing? What's Isaac doing in his field? What does the word lasuach mean? Unusual word. In fact, I'm curious. The Balaturim will notice that just how unusual this word is. How unusual is this word? The Balaturim tells us it states says the Balaturim, that the words lifnot erev appear only twice in the Tanakh. So this expression towards evening appears only twice. It appears here. He went out lasuach besadeh lifnot erev, and it also says towards evening a person shall immerse himself in water if he wants to become purified. So basically, if you're trying to become pure and you want to eat from the truma that night, you have to immerse after mincha. And so basically, this phrase is so unusual; it only appears twice. What do the words lasuach besadeh mean? So here Rashi tells us, quoting the Talmudic text, that it says in the Gemara in Brachos 61a, Yitzchak tikein tfilas mincha. Isaac instituted the mincha prayer, as it says, Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach besadeh lifnos arev. Isaac goes out to have this conversation in the field towards evening. And ein sicha el tefillah. Sicha means prayer, as it states, tefillah ani kiyatov v'lifnei Hashem yishpoch sicho. A prayer for the poor when he wraps himself, and before God when he pours out his words. So, according to this, the word siach means speech, and so basically, it doesn't mean conversation. It doesn't mean to take like a stroll. And so therefore it must certainly mean conversation. And Rashi cites several sources of that. According to this, to me, what it means is that what is prayer? A prayer is a conversation with God. Prayer is a conversation with God. Prayer is not about, the primary purpose of prayer, to my mind, is not about gathering to make our requests from Hashem, but it's like when we have a friend, we have a dear friend, and let's say there's somebody who we love, we want to call them every single day. We want to call them. And our conversation is with Hashem. That's the whole idea here. And we stop what we're doing and have a conversation with God. So normally we might think to ourselves when we have a conversation with our friend, does our friend give us their undivided attention? Hopefully, but not always. But God is always there to give us God's undivided attention. So Isaac, that's why, according to Isaac, the what was Isaac doing? He was conversing. He was conversing with God at this moment. This is the idea of the word prayer means lasuach basadeh, and that's the idea of Isaac instituted the mincha prayer. We're going to talk a little bit more about mincha, but first I want to talk about the power of prayer here from the Baal HaTurim. It says Yitzchak tikein tfilas mincha. Yitzchak instituted the afternoon prayers, and va'achar right after he prayed, nizdamnu Rivka, Rebecca was ordained for him. So this reminds us of the verse. Al zotit palel kol chasid elecha leit matzo. It is the verse from Psalms 32:6. For this, let every devout one pray to you at a time of finding. And the word matzo refers to matzah isha matzah tov. When it was found a good wife, it's found something good. And this is the idea that a person should be praying for their zivug, for their mate in life, for their mate in life. So what is the idea? Why is it called there are some other ideas about why it's called sicha, why sicha is related to prayer, and also some other ideas about why the afternoon prayer is called mincha. Why isn't the afternoon prayer called tefillah? Why is the morning prayer called shacharit, morning? The evening prayer called arvit, evening, and then afternoon prayer could be called bein arbayim. Why is it called mincha? Which the word mincha means an offering. So first, I wanted to share with you what Rav Nachman Breslov says. He says, "What is the word vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh?" He says this does not come from the word conversation, or not only from the word conversation, but it also comes from the word we find at the very beginning of Genesis. What do we say at the very beginning of Genesis? It says as follows. Let me cite the verse. It says, hold on. Oh, hold on. Let me see if I can find this verse. Here we go. Chapter 2, verse 4. Ela told us, Hashemayim va'aretz bi'baram. These are the products of heavens and earth when they were created, on the day that God made heaven and earth. Verse 5. The kol siach hasadeh terem yeh ba'aretz. Now, any tree of the field was not yet in the land, and kol esav hasadeh terem yitzmach, and the grass of the field had not yet sprouted. Va'adam ayin lavodas adamah. Meaning to say, there we see that the word siach hasadeh is referring to the trees of the field. So therefore, according to this approach, what does it mean when it says vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh? It's not a reference necessarily to just the conversation with God, but it's a reference to somehow vegetation. And that's what Rav Nachman of Breslov is pointing out. It relates back to the second chapter of Genesis, verse 5. But the Talmud says, Ein sicha el tefillah, that it means prayer here. So Rav Nachman of Breslov says something very spiritual point. He says, Tefillah so shall Yitzchak haisa im kol siach hasadeh. That the prayer of Isaac was with all of the trees of the field, meaning to say, all the trees of the field gave him of their strength into his prayer. That they all gave, all the natural world around him gave him strength to be able to recite his prayer. He's praying for his zivig. So that was Rav Nachman Breslov, this beautiful idea that the natural world gave him strength to be able to pray. The trees gave him strength to pray. Another explanation is, what does it mean when it says in the Talmud, Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh ein sicha ela tefillah, that the word sicha means prayer, but the word sicha means conversation. So it says Reb Bunam mi Peshischa, that it means ein sicha el tefillah, that every conversation of a tzaddik is a form of prayer. That the tzaddik's words, his simple words, his conversational words are forms of prayer. If you ever watch just the some of the great rabbis, some of the great rebbes, just having simple conversations with people, you see that it's very, very far from simple. And every word that they say is measured, and every and it's in a certain sense a prayer. Every word they're saying is a form of prayer. So the conversations of the tzaddikim are forms of prayer. That's what Rabuna Mipashishla says. Now I go to the question that was raised before: is why is the mincha prayer called the mincha prayer? Why isn't it called the Bein Arbayim, or the afternoon? Why is Shachar called morning and the evening prayer called Ma'ariv, which means evening, and the Shachar's prayer and the Mincha prayer is not called is called Mincha. So some want to say that. So we have a few answers to this question. The Abu Draham says that because it relates to the fact that there is a midrash that says that Adam sinned in the 10th hour of the first day towards evening. And it says in Genesis chapter 3, verse 8, and it says that they heard the sound of God walking in the garden by the spirit of the day. And the Targum translates that into Aramaic as Manach Yoma. So that therefore this is actually Manach Yoma is the Ruach Hayom towards the end of the day. It's called the spirit of the day, but it's also called the Manach Yoma, which is a contraction of the word. So Mincha is a contraction of that word. So actually Mincha does mean afternoon according to that approach. But the Torah Tamima gives a different explanation. He says that Mincha is called for the fact that the sun is resting at that time, that it is munach, that's when the sun is beginning to rest. And that's his explanation. Another explanation comes from the fact that the mincha is an offering. The mincha is an offering. And even though we say that technically speaking, the Shachrit and Mincha are obligatory, and the Arvis prayer it's a dispute whether it's obligatory or optional. Nevertheless, the practice is that on a spiritual level, the Shachrit's prayer is, of course, makes the most sense because we start our day with it. And basically, we're thanking God for returning our soul. And the evening prayer is the most also makes complete sense. We're going to sleep for the night, and so therefore we're going to be recognizing that we're praying to God to protect us while we sleep, to protect our soul, like we're unaware of what's going on. But the afternoon prayer is the most difficult. It's one that's not fixed. We don't know where it's. We don't necessarily know where we're going to do it. Most people who live in a community filled with Jews who pray, they know where they're going to daven Shacharis. They know which minyan they go to every morning. They wake up, they go to that minyan. They know where they're going to daven the Ma'ariv prayer. They know where they go every night. But the Mincha prayer, they're running around. Where are they going to daven Mincha? So the Mincha is an offering. That's why it's called an offering, because this is something where we're stopping our day and giving an offering, which is a supplemental prayer, so to speak. It's a spiritual prayer. We're not even aware of it. So that's perhaps why it's called an offering. Then there's another halach I wanted to share from you. That what does it say here? It says, I wanted to share with you, it says, Vatisa Rivka at the now, Rivka lifts her eyes and she sees Isaac and she falls off of the camel. Why did she do that? Why did she fall off of the camel? So Rashi tells us that why did she fall off the camel? Ishmita atzma, she let herself down towards the ground, but she did not reach the ground. Maybe, and why did she see him? At first glance, we might have said, okay, she was shocked. She didn't like what she saw. But Rashi tells us just the opposite. Rashi says, Ra'asa oso hadur v'toa mipanav. She saw him so resplendent in his prayer. She saw this man who was so spiritual, who was in this moment of deep prayer, and she was astounded by him. V'toa mipanav. And what does she do at this moment? Vatomer al ha'eved, and she says to the man, who is this man? She says to the servant, who is this man? Who is this man who's coming in the field to greet us? Vayomer ha'eved, and the servant says, Hu Adoni, he's my master. Vatikach hatzeif, and she takes the veil, vatitkas, and she covers herself. She takes the veil and she covers herself. So this idea of taking the veil and covering herself, this is very intriguing to me. Why is she covering herself at that moment? What's the power of here? What's the power of her covering herself? So some view this as a source. I mean, this is according to most authorities, the source for the practice of a bedekin, of covering the bride, of the groom placing the veil over the bride's face right before the chuppah. Who are the ones who cover themselves, and what's the power of covering oneself? It's saying that I'm limiting myself, and I'm only going to be for one person from now on. I'm going to be only for my husband. So too, in a certain degree, it's showing that the modesty, that when we cover ourselves for God, we wrap ourselves in our talis. When we cover ourselves, to a certain degree, we're saying we're only for God at this moment of prayer. Who are the two people in the Torah who covered themselves? Anybody remember? Who's the other person who covers themselves? Okay, the other person is Tamar. The other person is Tamar. So what is the connection between Tamar and Rebecca? Both of them had twins. Both Tamar and Rebecca had twins, but the twins of Rebecca brought about the war between the brothers, between Jacob and Esau, whereas the twins of Tamar, they hinted to peace. That was ultimately the Mashiach was born from those twins, and those two twins got along. And so we see from here that says the Divrei Yirmiyahu, that the covering up it symbolizes that this war at the end, the war between the brothers, this major war, and the war and the coming of the Mashiach that they're shrouded in a veil. Now we don't know when it will happen, and that there's a veil. God has basically placed a veil over the Mashiach, and we're waiting for that to be removed. Okay, so one more idea from Rav Tzvi Hirsch of Zidichov. He says, what does it mean that, what does Tzif, the veil, stand for? It stands for Amcha Yisrael Tzrichim Parnasa, that the needs of the community are required. So that's almost what she was wrapping herself in. And the last pasuk I wanted to focus on is the pasuk that comes next. It says, "Vayiviyah Yitzchak ha'oela." Yitzchak takes her into the tent of Sarah imo. Yitzchak takes her into Sarah, his mother's tent. Vayikach es Rivka, and he takes Rebecca. Vatihilo isha, she was his wife. Vayehaveh, and he loves her. Vayinochem Yitzchak achrei imo, and Isaac was comforted after his mother. So, what does it mean? What does it mean that he takes her in there and then he was comforted? So, Rashi here is also incredibly powerful. Rashi is so romantic here, and this is what Rashi writes. Rashi says, "Vayivia oela." He brought her into the tent, and behold, she was Vaharehi Sarah imo. Behold, she was Sarah his mother. Meaning to say, if he was saying to the tent of Sarah, then he would have written it Oela Sarah. But the Hay teaches us that it doesn't mean to the tent of Sarah, but rather he brought her into the tent, and Sarah is his mother. And behold, she was Sarah his mother. Not that he brought her into Sarah's tent, but he brought her into the tent, and behold, Sarah was his mother. What does that mean? She became the image of Sarah his mother. She became the image of Sarah his mother. She calls man Sarah Kayemes. Whenever Sarah was alive, Ner Daluk, a lamp would be lit. May Erev Shabbos, Erev Shabbos. From every Friday afternoon to every Friday afternoon, the lamp would be lit. Ubracha mitzuya beisa, and there would be a blessing in the dough. So the candle would stay lit with the spirit of Shabbos, would be in the 10th whole week, and there would be a blessing in the dough. The dough would be plentiful, and also anan kashur al olel. There would be a spiritual cloud hovering over the tent. Umisha Mesa, and once Sarah died, pasku, these things stopped. Kshabas Rivka chazru, and when Rebecca came, they returned. And so Rashi is giving us basically a very powerful spiritual reading that the Isaac's life was empty, even though Isaac was the greatest. He was the patriarch. He was the person who was our source of strength. His life was empty without his mother. There was this gap back. There was this tremendous gap in the world, this tremendous gap. But when finally Rebecca was brought into his house, then his spirituality returned. Hold on one second. I see that there's a comment. Let me see what it's saying. I don't think. Hold on. Somebody who I love is saying that Rebecca becoming Sarah is incestuous and creepy. That's not what it means, my dear friend. It means that she carried on the spiritual mission. She took the mantle. Like for example, she was stepping into the place. Sarah was a teacher. It says that Abraham and Sarah would stand on the street corners and bring people closer to God. So Rebecca was filling that role. That's what Rashi says. She became the image of Sarah. And Rashi gives, as not in the physical sense, she didn't look like her, but she carried on her spiritual mission. Shabbos, the Shabbos candles, the challah, and the spiritual cloud. That's to me, I don't view that, God forbid, as creepy. I view that as inspiring, that she was able to carry on the tremendous steps that Sarah, the tremendous role model that Sarah left for her. Anyway, of course, always a great honor. If anybody has any questions, happy to address.